Well, good afternoon and welcome to this digital workshop from Episcopal Parish Network on safety in churches. We are pleased to have you with us today. We're pleased to have our panelists with us today, we are honored to have them talking about this challenging topic, something that has come up and is important for all of our churches, schools, and institutions. We recognize that this is the first of several conversations that we will be hosting on this topic, and also that this panel has particular context in which each of these folks will be speaking, and it doesn't represent the broad diversity of the church. Everybody's context is different. So we'll be trying to bring other voices to the table in future sessions, but we are grateful for each of these individuals taking time to speak today. This will probably be a bit of a longer session than normal. We typically have our workshops last about an hour. We have budgeted an hour and a half to try to get through as many questions as possible. One quick note, we will not be providing, none of our panelists will be providing legal advice. If you have questions about particulars in the realm of legal, please contact your diocese chancellor, or the vestry can retain counsel. With that, I'm going to ask Stephen from St. Paul's, Kansas City, to offer a short opening prayer, and then he will hand it off to Jim, who is going to be our moderator. Stephen, would you offer a prayer?
Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, thank you for this space to gather with one another as we seek to be faithful and good stewards of the communities and places you have given to our care. Give us wisdom and courage to face these days as your disciples, and help us always to be in loving service of those in need, and that our lives might make your love known in all that we do and are. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thanks.
Amen.
Jim.
Very good. Well, thank you. Welcome to all of you online to this webinar on security. We have quite a few people who have joined us, which is excellent, and welcome. We're glad to have you. I just want to introduce the people you see on your screen that are going to partake in this webinar. First of all, my name is Jim Lamb. I'm the parish administrator at St. David's Episcopal Church in downtown Austin, Texas. And yes, it's hot. You don't need to ask. So wherever you are, I'm sure is much cooler. So I'm here, I'm just moderating. The speakers that are going to talk to you today, first is Jeannie Garrett. Jeannie was a communications director at St. David's here in Austin for many years, and now she is an author of the book Open Arms, Safe Communities, The Theology of Church Security, and she'll be talking with you a little bit about that. We also have from St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Kansas City, Missouri, Andrew Myler, who's the head of school at St. Paul's, and Reverend Stephen King, who's the rector. From St. Stephen's in Birmingham, Alabama, we have the Reverend John Burris and vestry member, Senior Warden Michael Yancey. So welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for giving up your day and your afternoon to be with all of us and impart your wisdom and knowledge and experiences with us. First, I'd like to pass it off to Jeannie Garrett, who can talk about a little bit in general, and then we'll invite the other participants to join as well. Jeannie?
Great. Thank you, Jim. As Jim said, I was the communications director at St. David's in Austin for 10 years, and that's where I started doing safety and security planning. And I really approached it from a mind frame of, if we weren't communicating this to our staff and to our volunteers and to our parishioners, then we could do this work all day long, but it really wasn't going to go anywhere. It didn't help us to have these policies and procedures written down without any real communication and implementation of them. So that's how I got started in this work. And I spent months researching and downloading stuff and figuring out what it was exactly we needed to do. And we started with a task force. And eventually, when I left St. David's, I felt like I had all of this information and resources, and I wanted to share it with other churches in the area. So I began consulting with other churches. And let me share my screen with you really quick. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what I have started seeing in the past 5 years that I've been doing this work with other churches. A lot of people are falling kind of in the same category. They don't either know how to begin, or they get to a certain point in their safety and security planning and they don't know what to do next. So I put together a list of considerations if you are in the process or starting to do this work, and things that you're going to want to think about. Really, I like to start with evaluating policies. What policies are in place? And one example is large bags. Do you allow large bags into your church on a Sunday? Do you have a different policy maybe for allowing or not allowing them in the sanctuary? And how do you enforce these? I also look at procedures. Reporting an incident or a concern. If one of your ushers or greeters has a concern on a Sunday morning, do they know who to report it to? What is the chain of command, and how is it going to be handled without a lot of figuring it out in the moment? And then trainings. Everybody wants to know, what do we do once we have this information pulled together? How do we train everybody and communicate to them what our policies and procedures are? Another consideration is financial cost. If you're looking at hiring security, that is an ongoing weekly or monthly cost that you're going to have to make sure that you can pay for. And when it comes to doing equipment, you get more costly when you're looking at cameras or additional or improving your lighting. So I say with safety and security planning, when you're looking at kind of tactical things, you want to start with the low-hanging fruit, take care of the really easy stuff that's not going to cost a lot of money, and do the work in layers to where you can build up for the things that are going to cost more. And then another consideration, a big one, is your available resources. Do you have staff or volunteers who can oversee this work as it's being done? And how can your local fire department, police department, and mental health agencies aid you in this? A lot of places have programs, they have free resources, they can come out and do risk assessment studies or tests with you. All of these people are great to make contact with, get to know, and figure out how they can help you as you go through this process. So talking to our congregations, that can be a really hard thing as people enter into this work. And what I like to say is it is normal to be afraid and fearful of violence in this day and age that we're living in. We are hearing it all the time on the news. So normalize that conversation, address the fact that this is really upsetting and that people are afraid and they don't know what to do and they don't want to have these thoughts when they're in church. But it's also important to lead from a safety mindset and not a mindset of fear. And one of the ways that I talk about doing this is that when it's usually the fear of violence or mass shooting that sparks people to start having these conversations about safety and security planning, but there are so many other things that are way more likely to happen on a Sunday, like a medical emergency. So when you start doing this work, or you continue in the work, or reassessing what you already have in place, also be looking at things of how are you going to respond to a medical emergency, to a fire, or to something like a tornado. And that can actually help ease some of the anxiety, because we're not just reacting to what's in the headlines, we're taking this kind of holistic approach that we want all of our campus to be safe from all kinds of emergencies. And it doesn't have to be, are we safe or welcoming? They can work together, and they can actually work together really well. So get that mindset in place that we can be safe and we can be welcoming. And I like to say, being prepared won't make it happen any more than being faithful will prevent a tragedy. And this is actually a conversation that I've had with somebody before, where they said, you know, I trust God. I am faithful that He is going to take care of us. And that's true. We have that faith, but we also have to take some realistic measures to put things in place to take care of ourselves as well in the process. So that's really a conversation that has come up on more than one occasion that I feel like people wrestle with. We can take safety seriously while also staying faithful to our mission of welcoming the stranger. And like I said, they can complement each other. And I'm going to actually, afterwards, you'll get a link to these PowerPoint slides, and I'm going to link the power of hello in there. And this is a greeting tactic that more and more places are starting to use. It's actually put out by the federal government. And it's how ushers and greeters and really anybody in your congregation can better engage a visitor coming in. And it's not just about assessing is there a concern or a problem, although that is a big part of it. It's also about better connecting a visitor to your ministries and areas where they might want to get plugged in more. So I'll link that and you can kind of do a deep dive into that if you want. So I know everyone on this panel will agree that there are hard conversations that are had when you do this work. And I wanted to list some of them here. These are the ones that I've seen. Parishioners carrying concealed handguns, whether that is allowed or not allowed. What is your policy and is it being enforced and how are you enforcing it? Armed on or off-duty officers hired for security and the optics of he or she in a uniform, possibly with a service weapon on them. Reducing entrances. I've started seeing a trend in this. And what I've seen is that as we lock more doors, close more doors to eliminate multiple access points around the church, what I'm seeing is where people have the most disagreements on is entrances that are not really used that much anymore, but by tradition have always been opened. And that's kind of been interesting to see those conversations surrounding it. And what does it mean emotionally kind of for us to lock these doors that really generations have been coming in through, but maybe aren't as used as much anymore. Security measures, those that are seen and unseen. Crisis response, if something happens at your church, are you going to talk to the media? Who's going to talk to the media? Pastoral care for the victims and their families. And where will you worship if your church or sanctuary isn't available for a while? I'm also going to link this nonprofit security grant program in the slides. When you get it, there is a grant program out there for houses of worship to get funding for improving your security. And I will link that. There's a lot of information out there and you can see if your church qualifies or not. And then there's the process to go through. I have done a deep dive on that into my own. And if you find yourself interested in that, feel free to reach out to me and I can tell you everything I know about it. And then trainings, as I talked about earlier. These are the trainings that I most often see people interested in. CRACE stands for Civilian Response to Active Shooter Event. It's actually a presentation. It's not a tactical training of any kind. And it really teaches the run, hide, fight, or avoid, deny, defend strategy. What I like about this is I usually offer it to an entire congregation. And that way everybody is kind of on the same page about what this strategy looks like. It creates a lot of conversation before, during, and after the presentation. And most importantly, it creates a culture of safety and awareness where everyone knows they play a part in keeping the campus safe. Mental health training. Almost every city has a local chapter of the National Alliance for Mental Illness. You can reach out to them. What I've seen that they're really helpful in doing is providing information on how to recognize if someone is on a pathway to violence, maybe some of those red flags to be looking for or that you're seeing but may not understand, how to assist somebody in a crisis in your community, and de-escalation tactics to prevent a situation from getting out of control. What can you do in the meantime until help arrives to help that person? Basic first aid. More and more churches are making sure they have AEDs, trauma bags, and stop the bleed kits, and also training individual staff, ushers, greeters, clergy on how to use those in case of an emergency. And then fire evacuation. I wanted to say one thing about this. Several times now, I've worked with churches to do a Sunday fire drill, and these are announced and they're planned, and we do not create any anxiety or chaos around them. But what I love about them is while they're a fire drill and we do have the local fire department there and we do kind of a risk assessment walkthrough with them afterward, what we're really training people here on is how to quickly leave a building in the case of any emergency. So what we're showing them is emergency exits, getting them to identify emergency exits that are closest to them, maybe in the sanctuary, not necessarily the door that they came in and out of that morning, but where are the nearest emergency exits and getting them in the habit of locating those and using those. It also is a good time to look at your plan for if you have people in the sanctuary and you have kids in Sunday school or a nursery, and they're going out separate doors, where is the assembly point, or how is reunification going to happen for those families? And then who is going to help those who are mobility, hearing, or sight impaired in the event of an emergency, regardless of what that emergency is, and evacuation is needed. So in all of this work, our theology must guide us. It is something we have to pivot back to over and over and over as we do this, have the hard conversations and make those decisions. I often reflect back on this quote from my rector, Chuck Treadwell, who was my boss at St. David's when I started this work, and he's really been supportive of it. And when we were talking about how do we do this work and how do we stay safe and welcome and how do we balance all these things, this is what he said to me. He said, I think the Anglican theology comes to our rescue. One of the core pieces of who we are as Episcopalians is that the truth is in the middle somewhere. We use our wisdom, we use our reason, we use our scripture and tradition, and bring all of the resources we have and ask what's smart, what's reasonable, what's holy. And I really wanted to share this because I think it is going to help set the tone for our conversation today as we move forward with all of this discussion that we're going to have surrounding safety and security planning.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. Just a reminder for those who may not have been on the call, I am monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that you would like to present to any of the direct presenters, put it in the chat. I'll make a note of it, and we'll try to answer as many of those as possible at the end. So I hope you hang on till the end to get your questions answered. And if you have any other comments, there's a lot of people on chat, so feel free to chat with me. One of the biggest questions right now is, how do we get copies of the presentation? This webinar is being recorded and it will be made available. And also any presentations that you see, PowerPoints like Jeannie's or others, will be made available as well. So rest assured, you'll be able to see and maybe even show it to other people in your congregation that need to see it to get a handle on it as well. With that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Andrew Mylar and Reverend Stephen King from St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Kansas City.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jeannie. That was a really wonderful framing here. I think one of the ways that our community here at St. Paul's has faced this is through a lot of the lens of what Jeannie said. So I really appreciate that. At St. Paul's in Kansas City, we are a church community and a day school community on about 1 or 2 city blocks in Midtown Kansas City. We have at our day school about 500 students age 2 through 8th grade and a worshiping community at the church. We share spaces, we occupy physical space, we worship and learn and play with each other all of the time. And so one of the as we began to face these questions in a way that increasingly became more urgent for us, we I think kind of took an approach of returning to who we are and why we're doing this. So in May of 2022, Andrew, you'll have to correct me, we took another look at some of the regular ongoing conversations we have after the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. That landed, of course, at an elementary school. And so for us, that hit home in a poignant way, as much as they all do. Then following the shooting in Nashville at a church school, again, we were forced to face this conversation head on. And it became important to us that we reacted faithfully and carefully, but not reactively, not overly reactively. We wanted to return to who we were. One of the important parts of that was recognizing that for the church and for the school, we have different priorities and different needs, different concerns. We are not able in some ways to operate in the same ways, and yet sometimes we have to. So what I think I want to say first is that lots of these how-tos even, or lots of the important turning spaces here are to remember that some of this is universal and some of it is unique to your place and to your community and to who you are and where you are and what kind of community you inhabit. And it's really important that I'm so glad, Jeannie, that you said that thing about welcoming and safe. We've lived through a a confrontation with that not being a false dichotomy, I think, to say we can be both. And in fact, in some ways, they are both. They need not be, at least on the church side of our campus, separate things. And so we've had to face that head on. I think it's also an important time for us as people of faith that we live willing to have a hard conversation and recognition that the world is not as we hope it for it to be, nor as we believe God calls it to be. And I think that that's important to do. Otherwise, we get stuck saying, gosh, I wish we didn't have to do this, or gosh, we shouldn't have to do this. Well, that's true. Me too. But the truth is that we do, and our communities need to be well. And that's part of the vocation that we are given as stewards of our community. And so I think we're called to face that with honesty and courage and grace, that truth that we live in that now and not yet. So for us at the church, one of the things that's coming, I'll let Andrew talk about the school. Andrew Myler is our head of school at the school. One of the, for us at the church, one of the things that we've discovered is that we have had a security plan in place for approximately 12 years. And it was emailed around approximately 12 years ago and never picked up again, nor was it implemented again. And so after the shootings recently, our church experienced one of our neighbors who was less than mentally well walk through a side entrance and up to the altar past 3 of our teenage acolytes. And it hit home that what we thought we had going fine because it was just working out was just not. And we needed to face that conversation in a new way. And so sometimes the resources that we have are already there. The good people in your communities have already done this work. And it's worth taking a look at what's already happened to see where you might pick that up. I think on the school and church side of our campus, we've learned that security practices are only as good as the implementation that takes place with them. And so I also appreciate Jeannie's reference to a shared buy-in of the community to make that happen. Andrew, do you want to talk about the school, how we've navigated this conversation with respect to the school?
Sure. I think anytime you have a shared campus like ours and shared ministries with the school, and then as Father Stephen mentioned, the food pantry. So we have a lot of people on the campus during the week. And so our operational reality really from 7:30 until our students are gone in the late evening is a lot different than you might see an operational reality on a Sunday morning. And so I think trying to reconcile the different needs was a challenge that Father Stephen and I, faced and met. And frankly, some different viewpoints between the vestry and the school side of the building. And I think Father Stephen did a great job of bridging that, going back to the theological conversation about, as you described it, what's smart and what's reasonable. And I think the hard thing for our community was maybe adjusting what's reasonable in 2023 versus maybe what we used to do. And so that's a journey we've been on, maybe a little bit more intentionally and long-term. I think what we've seen too is the mindset of our faculty and parents has changed dramatically. I'd even say in the last 18 months, in terms of what the expectations are. So I think really from a school point of view, it's putting in a lot of things that are visible and some of them that are invisible, and then having a plan. This morning, we spent about an hour on this with our faculty. And again, kind of made the point, our biggest threat is probably a gas leak. We have a lot of construction going on, but what would we do in the event of a gas leak? So it's not just these big events that we're trying to worry about. It's just the day-to-day and just making sure you have a plan. Like Father Stephen said, if you do have a plan, make sure that it's active and that you're thinking through it. And so I think that's been the value of it, but happy to comment or answer any questions on the school side if there are people on the call for that, but that's really where we are.
Sorry, I had a question pop up there.
Great, thank you so much.
I think, Jim, I think go ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't know if you guys were finished or not. So let's pass on. I just want to stop at this point. I should have done this at the beginning, but as I said, I'm from St. David's Church. And like many of you, before we get to St. Stephen's, I'm going to jump in. Like many of you, St. David's being a downtown church deals with a lot of different things. We have a very vibrant ministry. We have a Trinity Center, which is a resource center for the homeless in our building. It has its own separate entrance, but it's on our block. We have a day school like St. Paul's does with little ones. And so we have we're very open campus as far as welcoming everyone. And the thing we struggle with, which I think probably most every church struggles with, is how to be open and welcoming without and still allow those who are coming here for whatever reason to be safe and secure and feel like this is a safe place. And so that's always seems to be the give and take. You can't close all your doors and just be a fortress. We had that. It was called the Middle Ages, but we don't want to do that. And yet we don't want to just be laissez-faire of, well, we'll just let everybody come in and we don't have to worry because God will take care of us. So neither one are good solutions. And I think as you're hearing already that this panel and what everyone needs to come to is that delicate balance between being open, welcoming, Christian, and balancing that with how do we keep people safe as best we can. So I just wanted to plug that in a little bit and a little bit of St. David's quandary. We have a safety committee. We have a safety plan. Like Andrew and Stephen said, ours was done several years ago, and especially during COVID, we haven't talked about it at all with the staff because one, we weren't here for a year and a half. We weren't even on campus. So that's one of our goals this coming year is to just get that dust set off and make sure everyone understands, just simple as a fire drill. Where are you supposed to go on a fire drill? And there's several emergency exits out of this building. Where do we all meet up to? We make sure we have everyone accounted for. Who makes sure that the building goes through every floor of our 4 floors and make sure everyone's out of the building. Just a quick story that Jeannie brought up about, having fire drills during Sunday morning. I worked in a church in Minneapolis, Coon Rapids, a three-ring suburb of Minneapolis, and there was a thunderstorm and lightning hit the church on its lightning. Luckily, we had lightning suppression system, but it hit the church, blew out all the low voltage in the building, all the fire alarm system, everything. So the fire alarm went off, of course, because the circuit was burned up. Immediately, the kids got up, started going outside. The adults immediately got up and went into the building to find the fire. So it was like the kids knew what to do. The adults didn't know what to do, or did the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. So the other thing that we learned was everyone was leaving. Fire trucks couldn't get into the parking lot because everyone was leaving the parking lot and they couldn't get in. So that was one of the things to tell people not to leave, just stay in the parking lot. So yeah, just simple things like that to the other extreme. So that was just my 2 cents. I wanted to jump in there and let you talk about that. Now I'd like to introduce the Reverend John Burris, who's the rector at St. Stephen's in Birmingham, Alabama, and Michael Yancey, who is senior warden. Michael, I'm sorry, I don't remember if you're currently a senior warden or you're the past senior warden of St. Stephen's as well. And they'd like to talk to you about, unfortunately, their experience at St. Stephen's.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And just want to echo what Stephen mentioned, that both Stephen and Jeannie touched and Jim all touching that. How do we be welcoming, inclusive communities of hope while still being safe and responsible? And I feel that we've been answering a lot of the questions that are coming up around security and cameras and policies. But I wanted to kind of share a little different. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our story, and it's a story, I think, of hope. As hard as it is, a little over a year ago, we have a monthly potluck dinner for people who are the baby boomer kind of generation in our community, and a church member or someone who'd been worshiping with us for 5 to 6 months attended his second one of those gatherings, and towards the end of the gathering, he pulled out a gun and shot and killed 3 members of our church, 3 of the people that were more active than anyone else. 2 of the people that actually had just set the altar for Sunday before that potluck dinner. And he was and another parishioner at that dinner who had, by the grace of God, serious military training, was able to take him down and prevent several other people from losing their life that night. Another person that evening who had attended a active shooter training yelled out "active shooter" and helped, using that training, helps people get out of the building as quickly as possible. But I want to share kind of a little bit about what's happened since, and kind of I've got a few pictures, and we and my clergy colleagues and our staff, we invited a few people to reflect with us over the coming months. One of those was a priest named David Peters in Texas, who had written a book called The Post-Traumatic Jesus, and he's making a claim that the first Christians of that early church had gone through a horrible trauma, and that lens had shaped how they understood the story of Christ. And I think the inverse is also true. A community that goes through a horrible trauma, also it shapes our understanding of the gospel. And in this, so I want to say that we have to be as smart and safe and put all the procedures and policies into place. And yet some things are going to happen. And how, as church communities, can we be as strategic is probably not the right word, but wanting to lead our congregations through something horrible happening. And so I'd see if I can figure out how to share my screen. We practiced this, but you should have from trauma to healing. Some things that stand out from our stories. The first thing that we did was invite the community to be a part in touching something tangible. So we communicated. I think I wrote I did a Facebook Live. I was in Greece when it happened, and from 4 o'clock in the morning from my hotel lobby to the Sunday when we gathered, we invited people to take ribbons and hold them in their hands and pray and weave them into this chicken wire arrangement that was actually placed right in front of the altar the next several coming Sundays. And when we gathered on the 1-year anniversary for what we name as the Martyrs of St. Stephen's, these ribbons had been woven into a beautiful altar frontal, and you can see the deacon stall. There were 4 other priest stalls for the other clergy that were there that evening. And it's just this way of kind of seeing kind of hope and something being created. There's a lot of science out there that says about when people go through trauma, and actually this came from what happened in Sandy Hook about the people laying their hands on tangible objects and being a part of creating something as a hopeful response that I think triggers different parts of our brain. The other thing that happened I thought was interesting is a chaplain talked about a chaplain for our community that we're in. They have some volunteer chaplains from different churches. And he shared about not wanting to return to a scene of a crime. He'd come there that evening to be with the community and pray in the parking lot and with other clergy from all around the community. And so this idea of this place that's been so hopeful for many. We're a large, vibrant church that's the heart of the kind of Cahaba Heights area of Birmingham. And this place has so many wonderful, beautiful memories, and how not to let one tragic event. And so how do we create this place that people want to return to and not be scared to return to? And so this is the parish hall where the incident happens, and a labyrinth walking. And we actually decided to build a labyrinth in the heart of our campus. And it was finished. It was finished on June 16th, 2023. Right before the 1-year anniversary service, a couple hours before. And we invited the survivors of that evening and the family members of the deceased to take rocks and to place them into a fountain that's on the back side of this, as a reminder that people come here not just to commemorate those lost, but to those who survived as well, and to see all of our lives change. There's a aerial view of the labyrinth that's now in the heart of our campus. But a lot of this was decided as we wanted a place that the community continued to show up and come and visit, and not be a place that was, this horrible thing happened, but engaged to this commitment to be open and welcoming. And so this is an outdoor labyrinth so that people can access it 24 hours a day. Of course, there's a camera there now, so we know who's coming, but you can get there 24 hours a day. And hopefully we plan to pave the backside of the building that's to the left of this so that it's handicap accessible. And actually the path is wide enough for a wheelchair, which I believe is fairly unique, is a commitment to being open and welcoming to everyone. We've kind of doubled down on that's the kind of church that we want to be, in recognizing that it's impossible to how do we be smart and welcoming, but we want to be a place that includes everyone. And then we also had our parishioners write stories, and so most of the survivors, the daughter of one of the deceased is a creative writing professor, and she organized as a therapeutic process to help our community try to vocalize what happened, and turn it into stories of hope. One of the other people that was there that night was a career photographer for Southern Living, and so his photos tell the story, and this is a very helpful a way of kind of taking people what they experienced and turn it into something that helped all of us heal. Healing's ongoing. There are people still living with the nightmare of what happened, but this has been a very important way of gathering. So it's a story. There's lots of I got to figure out how to stop sharing the screen. But there we go. And maybe I can answer questions about what we've done, but it's a story of learning to see Jesus Christ on the other side of trauma. I was sharing with Jeannie that the armed police officer that's outside of St. Stephen's on most Sundays is the same one that was the first responder, and I've come to kind of see him as Jesus with his wounds in his hands in that upper room. But that's a story of resurrection that's in our Gospels, and yet it's a painful reminder of what happened, and yet a hopeful reminder that we still get to gather. We get to gather in hope, and it's a place that's vibrant. So it's a little bit of how we have responded to a tragic mass shooting on our campus. And I'll invite the senior warden last year, who I think probably deserves his name in Holy Women, Holy Men after what he has helped our church get through, Michael Yancey, for your comments.
Thanks, John, and thank you, everyone else. I just will touch briefly on to kind of put a little finer point on what one might expect in the immediate aftermath of an event like this, something catastrophic and tragic happening in your parish. And that, I think, sort of ties together, or maybe will tie together what John has talked about and our approach from a pastoral care standpoint. And I'll say personally that what you just heard John talk about has been the guiding spirit of our parish from day one, minute one, from June 16th. And I think that has helped us and kept us. So in the immediate, and this will harken back to some of Jenny's comments and her great points of what to be thinking about and in terms of an emergency plan and all that. In the immediate aftermath, as John mentioned, he was out of the country on June 16th with his wife and another group of parishioners on a trip. One of our associate rectors was also out of the country. We had one associate rector in town, and I too was out of town, but not out of the country. I was about 5 hours away. When we got the call, everyone from former vestry to current parishioners to anyone associated with St. Stephen's, most went to St. Stephen's to gather, not on the campus because the campus was at that time a crime scene, but across the street to where a prayer vigil formed. And we're fortunate at St. Stephen's, we're in Birmingham. The diocesan office is also in Birmingham. And so our Bishop, Glenda Curry, was in town, and she and some of her staff were on site immediately. Catherine, our associate rector, went, and we had a room full of people involved in, as they fled, they congregated in different places. They had to remain there for law enforcement reasons, were there for a number of hours. It was important for again, from a pastoral care standpoint, to have Catherine on site, to have Bishop Glenda on site, and other members, former members of our clergy there, all to help from a pastoral care standpoint with those attendees at the event. That was the immediate aftermath. The building itself remained a crime scene, even though everyone was eventually released to go home. And that was something, of course, we didn't have any experience or expectation of how to handle. We learned going into the next day that to be able to get access to the building, we were at the mercy of law enforcement and their investigation, and we were told it could take a day or it could take a week. And our event happened, the shooting happened on a Thursday night, and this is going into Friday, and according to our normal plan, we would be having church on Sunday, but we didn't know how any of this would unfold. But fortunately, John was able, as he mentioned, to put together some communications from overseas that helped tremendously. The very next morning, and of course we have the bishop and we have other priests who are all doing wonderful things for our community to help us and to help our parishioners. And one of the things that emerged quickly was a service the very next day at 10 o'clock in the morning at our sister church, St. Luke's. And that event, of course, was packed, and everyone from St. Stephen's was there, and everyone from a number of churches were there. But going into it, I convened the vestry. We had been communicating, of course, over the course of the evening, but we got together the next morning to put together a plan about how to deal with the media, because the media was already on site. CNN was here, all the local stations, and we expected the same sort of coverage to follow the next day. It wasn't quite as what we expected. It was more low key. They were very respectful of that service, but nonetheless, going into it as the vestry, we said, we will be approached, we'll be asked for comment, and the one thing we did was to say we will speak with one voice, and so we appointed a spokesperson so that everyone else could direct anyone with questions to that person. So that's what happened, and that worked well. And once we got through that service, we went straight back to St. Stephen's and began dealing with plans going forward, also getting John back in the country and all of that. But and then, so for over the span of that week, we had that service the next day at St. Luke's. We had another vestry meeting, and we organized and made the quick decision that we would have our Sunday service as normally planned. We did that. We opened the church back up. During the meantime, the crime scene was being cleaned and sanitized, and of course that's a major undertaking that you typically wouldn't think about in terms of how to handle a situation like this, but that's part of it. Also, as part of it, we were contacted by the diocesan office to let us know that our church insurance through Church Insurance Company of Vermont carried with it a malicious attack rider, which proved to be incredibly beneficial, and we were extremely grateful that Church Insurance of Vermont had gone to the trouble to acquire that, and it has helped us tremendously. And with that said, if I had a playbook then, as I sort of do now, one of my first calls would have been to engage more directly with the insurance company at the very outset. We were engaged as like the next day, but in terms of unfolding the benefits under that malicious attack rider, it took us some time, and that policy was so well done in the sense that it's designed to kick in to action at the point when something like this happens. And so it can provide you a roadmap. So I would encourage you to kind of identify whether you have that sort of coverage, and if you don't, consider getting it, and also talk to whoever your insurance person is and get some guidance on, if we have an event like this, what's my first step? That would be very beneficial. We lost a little bit of time, but not much. But again, that was an important point that we did not see that in terms of our, emergency planning anytime in the future of having that as a resource to draw from. So, and again, we had our Sunday service. We also then had another vestry meeting, and we broke the vestry into and staff into different camps to deal with communications, media, pastoral care. We had people assigned to document and record all that was being reported about the church and the event, to maintain that. We also we assembled a legal team. I'm a lawyer. I'm one of 4 lawyers that were on the vestry at the time, but we had other lawyers, and we retain counsel because it's a legally significant event potentially, and that was one of the first steps we did. We also began planning. We had a number of people coordinate volunteers, and so we tried to fill all those roles, imagine everything that was going to come up, and then we hosted or we held 3 funerals for our martyrs that week. So in the span of all of that I just described happened in the span of a week, concluding with the funerals.
Thank you, Michael and John. Thank you very much. If you still have questions in the chat, please put them in. I do have a couple that I recorded. Some have been answered on the chat, but I just want to put them through since some people may not be reading the chat as they're listening. One person said, interested in general best practices related to everyday building security, i.e. keys, locks, who has them, tracking, etc. I'm worried we are too lax and free. Plus, we are a fast growing church trending more every day. So I know, Jeannie, you commented to that. If you want to just state your comment, and then we can get some from people who've from the other panelists.
Yeah, so a lot of places, over the decades, there's multiple keys floating around there. And this does come into the cost of added security, but changing out the keys to either like a door keypad that can easily be reprogrammed just annually, or cards that can be swiped, that can be deactivated if they need to be. And also one thing I wanted to also add on to all of that is, if you are doing this work, put a COOP plan in your process, which is a continuance of operation plan, because we all know that like one sexton or that one maintenance worker at our church that knows how to run everything. And when that person leaves or something happens, there's a lot of spending time figuring out, how do you turn this off, or how do you, do this? So put that as part of your process, and knowing who has what keys and making sure everybody doesn't have them is another thing. But I highly encourage that COOP plan. I think it will save you hours of frustration and trying to figure it out down the road, if only one person is aware of how that all works.
I'll invite other panelists. Just at St. David's, we have one point of entry on our building's basically built this way. We have one point of entry. So we just put in a system where the doors are locked all the time and the receptionist can open it with a button, or she can ask them through an intercom and there's a camera on it, that type of thing. But even with that, doors are left open, they don't shut all the way. People don't check on the way out that they're closed all the way. So we're all human. So that's it. Any other comments from other panelists on keys or securing a building from a physical standpoint?
Just that there's 350,000 other options for what you can do, you know what I mean? And it's, I think, something that that's one of the places where I think your specific building and community campus really needs to be evaluated from your own perspective. I mean, we can give you the resources and the ideas and whatever else. Very likely you already know the best, you already know of the kind of obvious ones, but it's just where for us, at the school, we did things like glass that can't be, shot through as easily. Whereas at the church, that's not something that we, have brought to our building over there. So stuff like that I think just comes out particularly in buildings and places that are specific to your own context.
And I think it depends on your facility. So we have a lot of doors and a lot of external doors. So we actually even have door alarms. If a door is propped open for more than like 15 seconds, it sends an alert to multiple people in the building so that we can approach it on the school side.
Right. And also most police departments, I know Austin's does, they will send an officer over and walk through your building and give you some tips on security from their perspective as well. And sometimes insurance or other entities will do that as well.
One of the other things that this is a small detail that I didn't know about until we went through all this, is that our police department actually, thanks to our director of safety and security at the school, keeps access cards, those key card access, those cards that Jeannie meant in some of the local supervisors' police cars, so that actually they could get in if they needed to. So that's just come from a partnership that we've cultivated with our local police department. So definitely recommend somebody reaching out to the local community resource officers that are in your town or in your city.
Yeah.
Also, some buildings, there's also a Knox box feature that can be put into buildings, and you should have one near your main entrances, and that should hold the master key or cards or whatever you got.
And I would say if you're looking for, bringing in a company to assessment of a building's, expensive and so on, one of the Secret Service recommended, if you have relationships with our Jewish brothers and sisters, they've been probably more proactive around security for a lot longer and have wonderful resources and may be a kind of unknown resource within your community.
That's excellent points. And some of these may be, or I'm just doing them in the order they were posted, so some might be duplicates or out of order, but the question was, do St. Paul's and St. David's have separate safety planning for the school versus the church? Are the policies separate? If so, is there also joint planning and coordination? St. Paul's, you want to answer that first?
Yeah, we do have different policies, and although some of our employees are cross-trained across both places. So both me and, for example, our assistant rectors, also the school chaplain, are trained in some of the school security features. Some of the ways that the school uses our church community regularly come over to us. Some of the alert systems and things are in our building, but by and large, many of the practices are specifically different, and yet they've been pulled together with some of the same folks in leadership positions kind of together. So sort of yes and no, depending on which question's being asked, I guess. Andrew,
yeah, for clarification, is your school in a separate building from like the church offices and things like that?
Yeah, so you can kind of imagine walking down a city block basically and being at the other end of the block, although it's not quite that far, but yeah.
Sorry, Andrew.
But we are active in the church space on a daily basis. So we use the parish hall as an auxiliary space for our young students. And then we have all school chapel there every Friday where we take the whole school into the church. So we're closely connected. But I would say, again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, like our operational needs are different on a daily basis. So I think we've done a good job when we've talked about this of understanding that and then building our respective plans around it, knowing we're going to have crossover and how to handle the crossover moments. You know, like, for example, if we have security, not having the security person present in the sacred space on Friday, they're there, but they're not visible in the sacred space. Just things like that where we've talked through it.
Great. Yeah, at St. David's, we're a little bit different in that we are all in one build. It's a U-shaped building. The historic church is on the west end. Our 2001 wing that for most of the program offices and clergy offices, all of that was built in 2001. And in between is 1965, which is a 4-story, includes the Trinity Center on the lowest level. Our day school is on the first, what would be the first level. The administration entrance to the building is on the second, and our entrance to the historic church from a handicap perspective, and our secondary worship space and hospitality, the things like that, are on the 3rd floor or 4th floor if you're counting floors. So we have a joint one because obviously the school is in the exact same building that the rest of us are all in. So we have one plan for everyone. All the fire plan, everyone gets, enacts the fire drill at the same time, all those type of things. The school does obviously have things that are pertinent to them, like they have policies on custodial, non-custodial, guardians or parents. If a child gets injured on the playground, what's the process, things like that. The church necessarily does not have, although we do have that for our children's formation. But for the most part, we are all under the same umbrella just because we're all under the same roof. So that's that. Anybody else have anything else to add, Jeannie or anybody else? Another comment, it's more of a comment than a question. Would love to see congregations openly discussing secure gun storage with folks. And she put a link, or he put a link, besmartforkids.org. It's a good resource if people want to take advantage of that. Does anybody do anything as far as gun safety outside the church, like in homes or anything like that?
We are hosting a training for that at St. Paul's here in about a couple of weeks for our local deanery, children's and youth ministers, and then we'll begin to partner with that outgoing. But that exact same resource that was shared is the one that we'll be using.
Great. For John to John Burris, do you feel like what your church has done since the incident will prevent this from occurring again?
Absolutely not. We are not promised safety in this world. I think, but I do think what we've done may prevent something odd happening. We can't promise safety, but we have signs now outside that say this campus is under 24-hour security. That might prevent somebody from doing something that's looking for a random target. We've always had locks on our doors, but we're a little bit more strategic. We've limited exits. We've created plans. I think it makes us able to respond better, and it may prevent some things, but it doesn't mean that we can stop anything from happening. For example, one thing that we had a parishioner that had a heart episode in the middle of one of our services on Sunday, and the police officer outside was able to give direction to the first responders exactly how to get there as unobtrusively as possible. I mean, that's the kind of benefit of having that relationship with a police officer that knows your campus and can kind of, help guide them to exactly where this parishioner was. We have a much better relationship with our police department now, and they check on us periodically, and we're intimately connected, and it makes for a stronger community. My hope is that, we have more people trained on the AEDs and the first aid kits around the building. We have more around there so we can respond to something. But no, I mean, things are going to happen in this world. So.
Okay, thank you.
I want to piggyback, Jim, on something John
Yeah.
was saying, that relationship with your local fire department and police officers. I applaud one church that I'm working with who had this great idea. They are kind of out in a remote area, and they have created this care center, law enforcement care center, that in the evening, a sheriff's deputy or a police officer can pull into this kind of annex that they have where Daughters of the King does prayer during the day, and there's a full kitchen, there's a bathroom, there's coffee they're providing, there's snacks, and it's just having that police presence outside in the middle of the night. They're not doing anything, but it gives the officers a safe place to be, and they're getting to know these officers, and they're getting to know these deputies, and creating this this relationship with them that I think is really important. And part of the fire drill that I mentioned earlier was having that fire department now really aware of your campus. And one of the things we found for one of the drills that I did was that somebody mentioned the parking. First of all, you don't want all the cars leaving if something's happening, because it blocks the fire trucks getting in. But this church had designated a bunch of spots up front as handicap, and the fire trucks, as soon as they pulled up, they said, this is going to be our #1 problem. We can't get close enough with these spots here. So really having, talks and conversations, I think, with the emergency responders in your community is huge.
Yeah, I agree. Real quick, going back to John and Michael, is from somebody based on the incident that happened. They want to know exactly how did the veteran stop the attacker at the church dinner, if you're willing to talk about that or not.
Do you want me to take it, John?
Sure.
Or do you want to the veteran took the gunman down by force. The veteran was not armed. He got on him and disarmed him and subdued him until the first responders arrived. And it was a miraculous thing, both from his military training standpoint, but also the gunman was about 6'4", 270, and he's about 5'7" and 150.
Thanks.
He did receive a few months ago the Carnegie Hero Award, which they do a huge investigation into it. It's quite a remarkable testament to what happened.
Staying with John and Michael, how do you address the church's history with the shooting with newcomers? I think, John, you answered this in the chat, but just so everyone can see it.
No, I mean, the Vestavia Hills is one of the over the mountain kind of Birmingham neighborhoods. It was the first murder in like 20 or 30 years in Vestavia Hills. All three. It was a capital case. So I think everybody in the community knows about it. It was really one of the kind of beautiful things that happened initially. And so just a random parishioner said, hey, Venmo me $25 for the church and I'll put a green bow on your mailbox. Well, when you get to, $25,000 in your Venmo account, they'll shut it down. And the whole city was covered in green bows. It was absolutely beautiful. When I got home, the event happened on Friday. Michael actually picked me up in the Atlanta airport Friday around 7:00. And so we rolled back into Birmingham at 9:00. My entire cul-de-sac was covered in green bows. It was really beautiful and touching. We don't, it's interesting. I will say that my faith has been distilled a little bit. Christianity to me can be summed up. Some friends watched their friend be murdered and they found life on the other side. That's the story of the Christian faith, is we find life on the other side of all the pain and suffering of this world. And I feel like we're living that right now in a beautiful way. It's still hard. I mean, it's still hard, but it's also incredibly beautiful. So we don't shy away from it. We don't talk about it all the time either. We're church.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Somebody posted, we're a small congregation in South Alabama, and this discussion is very timely. At our last vestry, we had discussion of adding interior cameras versus privacy issues. Would someone please address this? I'll address it first, since we just installed 50 new cameras in St. David's property. We had 9 before, one of which didn't work. So I told the vestry this when we asked for the funding, and I told the staff, cameras do not prevent any crime. They only record it. So that's my opinion. But I've never seen anybody, maybe they do, but as I think it was John or Michael that said, they might, if a random person might think differently and walk away if they knew you had cameras. But if somebody's intent or not of right mind, they're not going to care if there's cameras or not. So it really is just a record in case, and we have had things happen. We had somebody get assaulted on, we were 2 blocks from the entertainment district of Austin. So, and we have a parking garage that houses a lot of people that park and then go down and indulge. So we had somebody get assaulted right on 7th Street by our building, and we had a camera up, but the camera blacked out during the whole assault, which really prompted us, we needed new cameras because we felt terrible that this person was assaulted, and we had no footage to help the police catch the perpetrator. So that's my opinion. I think cameras are very good for, again, helping the law enforcement catch criminal, whatever it is, if it's assault or stealing or arson or whatever, or something worse, hopefully not. But I welcome other panelists' opinions.
I think a camera might catch somebody that's scoping a place. I mean, that's the kind of behavior maybe to watch for. Michael's training a group to monitor the cameras. You know, what happens when somebody's acting odd, looking at the exits and that kind of stuff would be helpful to know if somebody's scoping the place out.
I'll add also that we've upgraded our camera system, and in the course of doing that, where to add cameras, our committee working on that, along with our parish administrator, worked with John and the clergy to address the sensitivity of that issue, is what spaces within the church should be camera free, and we decided on that, and with the help of the clergy, I think got them where they needed to be.
Yeah, and one of the questions is who monitors the cameras. I heard, John, you say that, Michael, you're training people on how to monitor. Ours record again, but John had a good point. You see people come up. We do monitor during the day when staff are here. We have the front receptionist has several cameras, basically the outside cameras on her screens. We have somebody on staff that also looks at cameras. Several of the areas have audio on them as well, like audio microphones in the large gathering areas. So if we hear something, we can pick it up as well. But it's not, it's an ongoing system. We don't pay somebody to sit in front of, 50 monitors and watch all the cameras all the time. It's just impossible. But it's really just for us, it's for recording and if we can catch something coming in. For example, a neighbor who may be not of right mind because of whatever, is acting funny on the streets, or there's an issue down at Trinity Center where Trinity Center asks them to leave. Typically, they walk right around the block up to the church entrance and demand something from the church then, because we're all connected. So if we see somebody coming around, or Trinity, calls up and says we just had to kick somebody out, that's kind of what we use the cameras for as well, to see what's going on if something were to happen or we think something has happened. Anybody else on cameras? Because they're not cheap, I'll tell you that. Another one, let's see. Another person said they're asking for selling points to a small, rural, peaceful community. I'll give you 2 examples from Texas. Uvalde, Texas is a small community that just had a horrific school shooter, was one of their former students. And then Sutherland, Texas, another very small community in Texas. Gunman walked into the church, started opening fire. So it does not just happen to city churches by any stretch of the imagination. It can happen anywhere. And so I think and I'll let other panelists, again, this is my opinion. I think to put your head in the sand and say it will never happen here, you're just inviting it to happen there. Others?
Yeah, and I just think we're all doing our best. None of these solutions are the perfect solution to any of this stuff. John's point that we're under no assumptions that this prevents or protects 100% perfectly against all of this stuff, but we all do this in a way that kind of moves us closer to the wellness of our community, I think, and that's the charge of those of us who are in care of our community. Really thinking of ourselves as the stewards of a community, I think invites us to recognize that our vocation is to do this work. So I don't know if that's a selling point or not, but I think that it's just a way that we it's not it's a way that we're honest about the realities of the world while also providing the best care that we can for the people who are in our care, I think. And we always, in every kinds of way, in church leadership or school leadership or any community leadership, we're just doing that better, trying to do that better and more faithfully every day, or every time we try to approach it. So I think that's how I've always understood this conversation as a kind of a progressive one. It's not one that we just kind of arrive at a promised land, you know.
Right. I will just go back a little bit to talk about schools. One of our first questions, I just thought of it. Because we're all in one building, and once you're in the building, you can kind of pretty much access most places. The school is a lockdown floor. You can't take the elevator down to that floor unless you have a pass that you buzz in. And parents actually scan in at the front desk and in a program called Bright Wheel, and it notifies the school that they're coming down, and their door is always locked. And so they have a code that the parents can put in, and it's issued to each family. But that's how we kind of help keep the school floor secure as best we can. But again, nothing is foolproof. Any other comments on that last note? Somebody asked, Michael, please explain how the insurance policy helped. I think you touched on this a little bit, but if you could reiterate.
Yeah, it provided coverage for a number of things, one of which was additional security, the cost of additional security that we would bring on site. And that coverage period was for 90 days. That covered the cost of, you know, the off-duty police officers that we didn't have prior to that. And it also provided, more significantly, coverage for counseling services. And that coverage period was for 3 years. And that's been incredibly helpful and beneficial to us because there have been counselors involved with us literally since that evening immediately after the event and ever since. And those costs, as you know, can be significant. So it's picking up that cost for most of the folks who are covered by it and who are seeking help through counseling.
I just add, if you're not sure if you have that, if you have somebody other than church insurance, you might want to talk to your insurance provider and see if they have it or if they could add it. Because as Michael says, it was very good.
The other kind of piece too is when the police respond, they're required to go into every locked room, and they will do that by whatever means are necessary. So you sometimes have damage from just the incident, you know, people fleeing and knocking over chairs or hitting walls, but then you also have the police coming in and opening doors and stuff. And so the insurance policy after the deductible covered those repairs.
And another element to it was they provide help with PR management and have experts who will work with you to help, you know, work out your media plan. Going back to my earlier comments, we didn't derive a lot of benefit from that because we had already done our own plan. And by the time we had fully engaged with the insurance company. So they were helpful in telling us what we did right and maybe what we could have done better. But that would be something that would have been very helpful earlier on. So
Okay, great. This one, Jeannie, maybe you might have a little more experience. Has anyone worked with a local county, city emergency management agent or officer, or to piggyback on that, or how do we contact one to get their services?
Yeah, so most of those departments have a community liaison person that you can reach out to, find out who that is, and ask what programs they have for houses of worship. What can they do? A lot of officers are trained in the CRACE presentation that I mentioned. Fire department will help you set up a drill. The fire departments are always great. They'll walk you through what to do and then an assessment afterward. Yeah, just reach out to them and see what they can help you with and how they run procedures and stuff on doing that.
Anybody else work with anybody like that?
Yeah, that's who I think we reached out through. Andrew, I think with the school is through them, through our community. I can't remember what they're called, community resource officer or something like that. That Jeannie mentioned. It's the same. That was the same beginning point for us, and then it moved into somebody else. But yeah, definitely recommend doing that.
Hey, quick question, since we were talking about insurance companies so much, was this Church Mutual that you guys were working with? I know a lot of people have them. I'm just curious. Okay.
It's church insurance, right? I believe. Yeah.
Oh, church insurance. I see.
They purchased a rider from another insurance company.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm just for those on the call who might have that policy, just to know directly who you guys were working with is helpful, or they could go talk to Church Mutual about it.
And I'll add just one more point to that once we were engaged with the insurance company who wrote the rider, which is Hiscox, they connected us with a consulting group called Control Risks. And the folks there are extremely professional and very helpful. And they were, almost everyone who works there as a consultant is either retired FBI or special services. And if you were thinking about doing a security audit and a full-blown security audit, a company like Control Risk would be a resource to consider, because they have thought this through very thoroughly.
Okay. Thank you. And just those of you on the call, I know some people have dropped off already, but we'll go till the half hour. If you can hold on, we just have a few more questions that people have posted. One is, do you have signage that the church property is a gun-free zone? If so, is the signage permanent or temporary? And then another person chimed in, doesn't a gun-free zone sign let the bad guys know it's a safe place to attack? If we could address both those. Anyone? John, or we do post them. We post the required ones on our front doors on the glass. So
We're in Alabama. Y'all are in Texas too. It's I've always felt those decisions are best coming from a diocese. It's a lot easier when the bishop says that we want all of our churches to do this, and that's no criticism at all of our bishop's been incredible. But it would be a hard, being in Alabama, it would be really hard for us to make that decision because of the dilemma that you've named. Wouldn't that just expose? I have asked a parishioner to go put their gun in their car because I didn't like the sign that it sent with it being exposed, and didn't think it was pastorally appropriate after what happened, and they did very, very willingly. Part of the we want to have these clear guidelines and rules, and it's just a much more complicated world that we live in, and I don't have a clear answer. So we don't see guns in our church, and I don't think it would have prevented if we had a sign. It more as kind of sending a value of a community, which is beautiful, without really making a difference.
Yeah, our diocese has a diocesan policy against all diocesan property, so we had to do some work with our diocesan office for the school to be able to arm our security guard, which is the decision that was made last spring. That was really a hard one process for us to move through the couple of months. That's some of how we got into the middle of this conversation here. I think for me, this is maybe crass, but if somebody's going to cause harm to your community, they're going to cause harm to your community, whether a sign is posted or not. And so the signs for me are what John just said, right? They're a claim about who this community is seeking to be. They're not a security measure in some sense, right? They're really just a public claim of who we are. In the state of Missouri, where we are, there was last legislative session, there's all kinds of conversation around forcing or not forcing signage. So again, another local issue that comes to pass. But that's for me where I come down on signage issues.
Okay. Related question, someone posted, do you suggest that someone be qualified and armed during service? I'm thinking they're talking about maybe armed ushers or something, not necessarily police officers standing on church property in case something were to happen.
Qualifications seem like a good thing to me. That's where we went with the school. Was our security person is a former military, former police officer, so we felt more comfortable that way. You know, it's a tough question to answer on the local level. It's a super tough question to answer about whether somebody's in your building or not. I'll say that step for us will be a major one if and when that happens. And it's not a part of our regular Sunday conversation. We've chosen to kind of take on the, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, 20 steps to ensure safety that we were not really following very well first. And I think if we feel like right now that if we can get a handle on that, we'll be in a better place, and maybe we have to approach that conversation at another time. But that's where we are. Everybody makes a different decision in a different context.
We said no to.
Yeah. Currently at St. David's, we have unarmed security guards for a portion of the day while the pickup and drop off of the school is happening from like 10 to 6. And then in the evening on Wednesdays, when we have all our formation in the evening, and then we'll have an unarmed guard on Sunday mornings. Not so much for people coming to church as opposed to make sure that neighbors aren't panhandling in the parking lot and that type of thing. So it's more of a sense, again, trying to be open and welcoming. A lot of people are offended or for different reasons when you have an armed officer standing at the door or on the property, as opposed, so you have to think about that as well. Not every community and not every culture feels safe around police officers for some legitimate reasons. Another question is policy on having church members on site when outside groups use meeting space necessary for long-term usage groups who meet weekly. Also recommend posting a floor plan with exits marked and numbered ? You want to take a shot at any of those?
We have somebody on site all the time. If there's an event, a staff person usually on site. If there's an outside event, ongoing events, not as much, but on outside things, weddings, city meetings, whatever it is, there's somebody from the staff present. We don't have specific security on our church side, but somebody from the staff present at all events.
Anybody else? John or Michael, do you guys have a policy?
I don't think we have a specific policy. We just, there's somebody from the church here, and we have events here 7 days a week. And there's, I think, universally a church staff member here, unless it's, well, I take that back. There are some, we have a building across the street that we've given, access to the groups that are kind of trained to use it and have their own kind of ways of locking and unlocking. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Jeannie, I think I cut you off, Jeannie. What were you going to say?
And that's fine. One of the things I talk with churches about is having like communication collateral available, especially in places where people are renting space or meeting from outside groups. So like say in a room that there's a weekly meeting, but those people aren't church members or privy to all the safety and security stuff being done. You can put a sign in that room that says, if there's a medical emergency, call 911. And this is the address. A lot of people don't even know their church address. And this is the nearest entrance to this room where you're at. And if there's a fire, this is the quickest exit route, which is generally required, I think, by fire inspectors. But then if you're going to lock down, this is how you lock down specifically in this room. And this is how you would this is what you would do for a tornado. So kind of these safety things, they don't have to be in every single room, but this is where I think schools do a really good job. If your church has a day school in it, a lot of this work has already been done. And in some cases, we're just kind of mimicking that a little bit.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, we require St. David's, again, because we have one entrance, we require a front desk person and at least one sexton on site anytime anybody's using our buildings other than a staff person. But if we have a parishioner or an outside group, those two people have to be here until they leave. Person joined late, would love to see the presentation, which it is available. Recording of this will be available to everybody. Did you address any behavior indicators of the pre-incident cycle? So Jeannie, I don't know if you can address that, and then maybe others can chime in on what they do to look at that.
Yeah, so generally, like, that's something that you can talk with, like NAMI is a great resource for that. And that's if somebody is in distress or in crisis or things that you may want to keep an eye out for. But yeah, there's a lot of work that can be done ahead of time, just with like your ushers and greeters or your staff people about, I think this is what the question is, what are some of those red flags? What are things? And really, and I want to kind of drive this home, having been an employee at a church for 10 years, this is really important on the staff level, that we're also looking at our church as a place of employment. And if there's something going on with a person, that there is a chain of command for reporting that to. Not all churches have like an HR person. And then what happens after that? There's so much, when we hear about workplace violence, and churches are workplaces for a lot of people. And I just want to be really mindful of that when I do this work, that our staff feel safe too. And so I guess pre-violence indicators really, to me, is a place that I would want to do some education on for staff people.
And real quick, last question, Jeannie, check the chat. Can you talk about financial resources available to help congregations?
I can address that. Sorry, I was reading the chat real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing I mentioned earlier, and I'll link it in the slides, the nonprofit security grant program. That, has anybody on the panel gone through that yet? Applied for that and done it? I know St. Matthew's from Austin is here, and they did it, and they educated me on all the ins and outs of it. But you can do an application. There's a lot of information online about it. You apply on the state level. Then if you get funding, it goes to the national level. You have to get approved. That it is for safety work coming up. You can't do anything retroactive, but it does cover things like cameras. It covers bullet resistant glass, putting like a film over your glass that would help it be bullet resistant. It does cover having a security officer on duty on Sundays. The one thing I will say real quick about it, there's so much information online, and I'm happy to answer questions offline, is that you have to be able to prove or show some kind of concern that your church is could be a target for terrorism, and that includes domestic terrorism. So that can be given your location. It could be some of the ministry things that you do and promote out in the community. That's the one thing that you do need to talk about in your application.
Okay. Thank you. Just somebody asked you for a question directly to you, Jeannie. Who do you recommend for assistance with pre-violence indicators? Thought you mentioned somebody.
I also work with somebody that is former Secret Service. So that is usually who I go to talk about. And I think that, Michael, you mentioned working with somebody on that level. Yes, you can do private consultants on that. Also, there's just so much information out there. NAMI is good. That's more mental illness, though, so I don't want to keep kicking it back to them. But yeah, I usually tend to kind of go towards people that have been in law enforcement, current or former, and look at kind of like the pathway to violence and what some of those red flags are. What are things that are happening in somebody's life? It's all, family, divorce, losing employment, just kind of training on that information.
Great, thank you. Well, we've bumped up to the half of the hour, and so I want to thank all the panelists for their great words of wisdom and suggestions and answering their questions. I know some of it is very painful to talk about. It's painful not only if you've experienced it, but painful to think about that it could happen to you. But as John said eloquently, the Christianity is born out of death. We're the rising phoenix, rising out of the ashes, and we will carry on and continue to preach and live God's love. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the Episcopal Parish Network and Joe Swimmer for providing this free webinar. And if your church is not a member of the Episcopal Parish Network, I suggest you get part of that, because there's a lot of great webinars like this one, as well as the conference every year. So I encourage all Episcopal churches to do that. So thank you all so much, Michael, John, Jeannie, Andrew, Stephen, Joe, who's in the background. Thank you all so much for participating, and I will see you again at some point, I'm sure. Thank you very much.